Hi, folks. I'm Peter Lemieux with Rounding Third. I tell baseball stories. I'm here today just to introduce a story that comes from our archives. We are in St. Patrick's season. It's no longer St. Patrick's Day because if you go to the main stores that people go to, Target, Walmart, and those stores, they have had up for at least 7 or 10 days. And it's not St. Patrick's Day yet as I make this, all kinds of green things that you can buy. Posters, cards, creatures that are painted green, leprechauns, all kinds of things, because it's not St. Patrick's Day, it's St. Patrick's season. Now, during this season, it's proper that people enjoy and celebrate Ireland and the people of Ireland, and they do it in all kinds of ways, folks. You know them all. I'm going to offer to you a story about a great Irish baseball player, little known because he happened so long ago. He is in the Hall of Fame, and his Irish heritage has a huge part of this story. So please enjoy my story of Jimmy Collins. Hi, folks. I'm Peter Lemieux with Rounding Third. I tell baseball stories, and I got a new one for you. Typically what happens to me is there's a baseball story that I'm anxious to share with you. But this one happened a little differently. I got told a story that had nothing to do with baseball, except at the end I was told it was about baseball. So I had to do some research. And my research is what the story's about today. Start at the beginning. My daughter and her husband went out for their annual St. Patrick's Day party, which is they go out for Irish breakfast at an Irish bar. Now, while they were there, my son-in-law tells me there was a group called the Drop Kick Murphys. Doesn't mean anything to me. The Drop Kick Murphys sang a song about Jimmy Collins' wake. Once again, big shrug. So what? And then he said to me, I think Jimmy Collins had something to do with baseball. Now I go to work. So I go and I find out that Jimmy Collins is actually in the Hall of Fame. But it's a long, long time ago that he played. His career went from 1895 to 1908. Now, until 1901, there was only one league, the National League. And Jimmy Collins ended up on a team called the Boston Bean Eaters of the National League. In 1901, Boston got an American League team. It's the first year of the American League. And they were called creatively the Boston Americans. So the Boston Americans wanted to really market to a specific ethnic group. You see, in this time, when people came and immigrated to the country, they would live together. The Irish lived with the Irish, the French with the French, the English with the English, the Polish, whatever. They would stay in their own groups. They would live together. They would have their own schools, their own churches, and they really didn't mix very much. There was a predominant group of Irish people in Boston at the time. So the owners of the Americans decided to make the Boston Americans a heavily Irish team. First step would be to hire Jimmy Collins off of the Bean Eaters and bring him to the Americans. Jimmy Collins, of course, was Irish. He was a very famous third baseman. At the time, his reputation was he was the best third baseman in baseball defensively. He also was a player manager. So they gave him a bonus, a couple $1,000 back then, big money, and he became the player manager of the brand new Boston Americans. They then set about going around and signing as many Irish players as they could and marketed themselves kind of as Boston's Irish team, which worked. The Irish population came out and supported them very, very heavily. A couple words about Jimmy Collins. Jimmy Collins had this reputation as the best fielder in baseball. He is credited with fielding bunts at third base and getting people out at first. He kind of created the right way to do that. And that was his reputation, this great fielder. I looked it up. How do you compare a great fielder in 1901 to somebody today? You can't. However, he only played from 95 to 08. I think it's about 14 years in the major leagues. Today, Jimmy Collins has the most putouts as a third baseman, except for Brooks Robinson. He has the second most putouts as a third baseman. That deserves some sort of wow, okay? He had a credible batting average, 296, not bad. Couple of years, he was in the mid 350s, 330, something like that. But his claim to fame was as a leader. Jimmy Collins was the manager of the Boston Americans. Now, let me tell you another group that existed at the time, or at least got created, was a group of fans called the Royal Rooters. The Royal Rooters were a group of Irish men who would go to the game, sit together, scream and holler, and just try to whip the people into a frenzy. On big games, the Americans had the Royal Rooters march out onto the field toward their seats, getting the people to cheer. There's pictures of them waving Boston American pennants. Unusual when you look at these pictures, though, is like typical of the times. When people used to go to baseball games, they wore coats and ties. So all these Royal Rooters were dressed up. But anyway, they were famous for disrupting the visiting team and being like, I guess it would be like going to a college home game with all the local fans around. But I don't know. I wasn't alive in 1901. 1901, they had a good year. 1902, they won the pennant. And in 1903, they also won the pennant. And for the first time in baseball history, there was a World Series. Never had a World Series before. 1903, the Boston Americans defeated Pittsburgh Pirates. Therefore, Boston Americans won the very first World Series. You cannot take that out of their history. The first national champions. So upset by the National League loss that John McGraw of the Giants refused to play a series in 04. He couldn't handle the National League losing to the American League again. They stayed the Boston Americans to around 1908 when they became the Red Sox. Oh, by the way, the Bean Eaters, you probably figured this out, they became the Boston Braves. But that's what was going on. Jimmy Collins retired and went back to his hometown of Buffalo, New York, where he lived quite a while. He didn't die till 1945. Now we get to the point of the story. Jimmy Collins' wake. When I heard the story, I said, this can't be true. But then I have friends who are Irish, and they say, oh, yeah, this is what can happen. They had the wake in the Collins home, which is what you did in those days. A lot of the ball players who won the first World Series went to Buffalo for, I guess it was actually Niagara Falls, but they're next to each other, went there for Jimmy Collins' wake. They had to have been old, but people associated with the Red Sox and the Boston Americans went to the wake in the Collins home. And what they did, and this is what the song's about, they propped up Jimmy's body, brought the World Series trophy in, and had the corpse hold on to the trophy while all the people in there sang Irish songs and drank whiskey to Jimmy Collins. The fact that he was holding the World Series trophy, the very first one, was what motivated the song. So that's the story. Hall of Fame player you probably have never heard of. The history of Boston Red Sox winning the very first series as the Americans, and the pride of all the Irish people in Boston at that accomplishment, and the esteem to which they held up Jimmy Collins as the player manager. I thought about this Irish thing, and I don't know if it's true, and that's got to be true. Isn't it interesting that the Boston basketball team became the Celtics with a shamrock wearing green? That's why I'm a great detective. Folks, that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, make comments. What stories do you know? What stories do you want me to look up and tell again? In the meantime, have a great day. Enjoy baseball. Greatest sport ever.